Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the session on project management. We are kicking off tonight, and we will have 3 days. Our schedule as follows. For day one, we are looking at project management and its importance, and then we will look at a simplified project phase model, and we will touch on applying the triple constraint model. And then day 2 and 3, we will look at project monitoring and evaluation. We will also look at resource mobilization and donor relations with a focus on proposal writing, but also how to obtain funds for projects. I'm Simonee Mulamata, coming to you from Windhoek, Namibia. And I hope you all had a wonderful Africa Day. We commemorated 2 days ago. I also want to congratulate Otis on the signing ceremony today. I witnessed on Facebook some of the posts. Congratulations on that. Thank you. Project management. Now, in order for us to understand project management, I would like us first to look at some definitions and terms, and then we all will go into the rest of the content. Now, project management is an important element in the development sector, but also in private sector, you can get involved in projects, and also the international NGO sector, which is predominantly development sector, but also in government. All the work that we are doing in this day and age involves projects. And it's important that we have sound managers, that we have good managers, individuals that has the right insight and understanding. As leaders that want to change our environment, if we look back into the history of projects, you will understand that it is project management that has evolved over the years that has enabled us as different nations to touch issues around growth and development, and every sector in this day, as I'm speaking, is being developed and taken further through project management. Now, project management refers to a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product or a service or result. The purpose of a project is to plan, organize, manage resources, to bring about the successful completion of a specific or project goal or outcome or output. Now, projects deliver integrated outputs, which we call deliverables, which should lead to better outcomes or better results. It's always for the betterment of our communities, our environment, our economies, and our nations as a whole, which includes other stakeholders as well, such as our donors and the community. Now, projects are time-bound. It's one thing we need to underline and focus on the requirements to deliver specific benefits, like I said earlier, in our community, in ways that are cost-effective, but that are also measurable. Again, what is a project? We continue to define a sequence of tasks with a beginning and an end. Like I said, it's time-bound. That is bound by time, it's bound by resources, and it's bound by the desired results. It's a temporary endeavor that results in change. It's cross-functional. In other words, there could be more than one function involved for an individual. It is unique because it's not business as usual. And it is uncertain. That is why we say it's time-bound, but we also don't know. Sometimes it happens that a project needs to end before time. Sometimes it is the external environment that determines our projects. One classical example was last year in 2020 when we had COVID-19. Most of the donor funding was frozen and most of government funding was redirected, and most nations suffered losses in their general economy, which has an impact on projects because whatever economy, whatever donor, whatever government fed or fueled or supported these projects had to redirect their funding or their scope of work. And we are still, as we are talking, redesigning our projects and our focus. So that is why we say it is uncertain. However, one of the things we have discovered is uncertainty has become a basic human need. And if we do not realize that, we will not be able to work on projects. What a project is not, it is not more of the same. In other words, it is not something you get every day where you can just walk into a government institution and say, I'm applying for a certain job, and then you feel you are going to land on a project. It is not that. It is not open-ended. In other words, you cannot just do anything within a project. A project is focused. And that is why I said it's not unfocused. It's focused on meeting a specific need within a community, within a nation. And it is not more of the same. Okay, we have duplicated that, but I needed us to understand that. So we said it's time bound. We said it is specific, it has a focus, and it is one particular or a set of issues that it focuses on at a time, or needs that it needs to meet. Now, what is a program? There's a difference between programs and projects. I decided to put this in as a definition because many times people are working on programs and they call it projects. They apply for a project manager position, but they say they are program managers. There is a difference. Programs are multiple projects, and there could be multiple donors, and it's long-term in comparison to projects. Programs are open-ended. You can diversify. You can come up with different elements within a program. You can also use the funds accordingly, and programs are not necessarily time-bound. The only time within a program will be your logical framework and your timelines and your normal reporting times, but it is not time bound in terms of funding and reporting like a project. So what we are saying is, when I am saying I am working on an HIV program or a COVID-19 program or a food and nutrition program, it means within that program, there could be multiple smaller projects that within itself function and employ individuals and has functions within communities different from the overall program. So we can say that a program, it could be an umbrella of different projects. And then we also want to define a program portfolio, because there's what we call portfolio, there's what we call program, there's what we call project. Now, within a portfolio is then multiple programs. And portfolio, it's ongoing, it's long-term, and so that is the difference between the three. And when we talk of diversified funding, it could be within this portfolio. There can be an ICT project, but there can also be a nutrition management project, but they can then also be an education project. And at the same time, there could be a leadership project, so, or program. And that is how we want to define a portfolio. And if you are conversant with how donor funding works, international donor agencies work, you will be able to identify the difference between a program, a project, and a portfolio. One of the examples I can give you is, having worked with the United Nations and other international NGOs, one of the examples I can give you is they have what they call TC projects, technical cooperation projects, and these projects can vary from 3 to 6 months to 2 years. Then they have what they call fixed term projects, which are the 3 to 5 year projects. And then they have what they call regular budget, which are the programs. And regular budget simply refers to full-time of programs that employ individuals full-time within the United Nations, within whatever international donor agency you are conversant with. And that is the difference between the three programs or portfolios to start with. Now, project management in itself speaks of the ability to deliver projects on schedule, on a budget, and it's aligned with either business goals or the project goals. And it's key to gaining an edge in today's highly competitive global business environment. Now, projects has evolved. We are no longer thinking of community development. When we talk of projects, we also have business projects. We have social enterprise, whereby we can combine the developmental aspect with the business aspect. And that is what we call, when we speak of the competitive global business environment in project management. It requires organizational skills and an analytical mind, somebody who thinks without a box. Remember, a few weeks earlier, I said, we don't talk of thinking outside the box, because how did you get inside a box? You must have a very analytical mind, and you must be able to adapt interpersonal abilities. You must be flexible when you want to be a good project manager. Now, the project manager in itself is responsible for ensuring the overall success of the project. We want to look at a project manager as the champion of a project. Now, you can work within an organization with its own structure that has a CEO and senior management, and you are the project manager. You are the champion of the particular project that you have been assigned to. The project manager could be in charge of one or more projects, and the project manager should collaborate closely with a series of stakeholders to ensure that hello? Hello? To ensure that can you hear me? Okay, I'll continue. The project manager should collaborate closely with an array of stakeholders to ensure that the work of the project is completed.
Christopher, to please off your mic. Please mute your mic. It's disturbing.
Thank you. Now, why is project management important? Project management is very important because it will help an organization to have a more predictable project planning and execution process. If you manage well, your planning process and your execution process works well. Now, project management involves strategic planning. We will talk about planning later. And in strategic planning, when you want to have a very good execution, you can spend 90 to 95% in the planning process, and the 5% execution could be very excellent if that 95% process is done thoroughly. And then also, project managers will help your organization to adhere to budgets, to schedules, and scope guidelines. It's very, very, very important. To resolve project roadblocks, or we call it bottlenecks, and escalate issues quicker and easier. In other words, whatever comes up, the project manager acts upon this. And then identify and terminate projects that do not have relevant business value. As you go with a project, you will be able to find out, this is my organization I'm working with. There are some other smaller projects that does not have relevance anymore, that does not have business value anymore. And also your organization or your project can become more efficient. It can improve collaboration across and within teams, across teams and within teams, and even with stakeholders. And then also external stakeholders, and then also identify and plan for risks. So that is why it's important that we manage our projects. Now, I'm going to speak in tomorrow's session about the triple constraint model. I just want us to understand what we mean about that. The success of a project is impacted by three things: the cost, the time, and the scope of a project. Now, one of the key responsibilities of anyone who manages any project of any kind that involves funding need to understand that the balance of these three constraints are crucial to the success of a project. The costs, in other words, we're talking budgets, are connected to time or linked to time. Projects are time bound, and we need to report on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis, on an annual basis to our donors and to our stakeholders. And the scope of the project is so important, cannot be overemphasized. So we will talk about that more in tomorrow's session, because I believe it's more relevant to when you are developing your proposals, when you are requesting funding from donors, and so on. There is a statement in project management where they say the donor is always right, and the donor is the key stakeholder. But we want to understand that in some organizations, you get to understand that the core business should be the focus of, not necessarily the donors anymore. And we will talk about that later. Now, there are two methodologies that governs our project management, that governs successful projects, that governs high-level impactful projects, and that is the life cycle of the project and the project management process. Now, many a times it is used interchangeably, but the management process in principle is actually part of the cycle. The elements of the management process are embedded within the cycle, but you cannot do the one without the other. And that is why I have laid it out for you to understand. In a project life cycle, the cycle is unique to a specific project. It can be unique to the specific industry. It can be unique to your needs, to your organization, or to whatever project you are busy implementing. And then it's also highly customizable, and the phases are unique to the project. Like I said, it's very unique to the project. In other words, whatever happens within a phase, within a cycle, it's about the project, whatever you are executing. Now, in the project management process, it is all set in stone. It's the same for all projects. And we have process groups. In other words, if we talk of initiating, which could be a cycle, but there's a process groups within. In other words, these process groups could be the finance team. It could be the HR management team. It could be the team building team. They are embedded in every single individual cycle of a project. So these two are inevitable, and it comes in every project. Now, there are 5 project processes or management processes, which is initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, and closing. Initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, and closing, and that will be our focus for tonight. Now, in initiating, the goal for this phase is to define the project. You need to be able to articulate your project. In the same way you articulate your vision, you articulate your project, because project should be a small portion or a part of whatever you are doing within your vision. And then also planning. This phase includes developing a roadmap for everyone to follow. Executing and monitoring. In this stage, the project team is building on deliverables, and deliverables are created. So execution is the core of any project when you want to achieve any goal. And monitoring is something that we will go into detail tomorrow, which is part of execution. And then important is your monitoring process does not start the way project management has been shaped. It does not start on the 4th phase like we see here, initiating, planning, executing. No, your monitoring and evaluation process or your strategy should be already done when you start with execution. In other words, it's part of the planning process. Your framework is in place, and you need to know what to monitor. The moment you develop your indicators, that is when you know what to monitor. And then also project managers will monitor and measure project performance to ensure it stays on track. Monitoring and evaluation is always about making sure that progress is in line with the objectives and with what we want to achieve or the impact that we will need to make. And closing, the project is completed, a post-mortem is held, and the project is transferred to another team who will maintain it, or it is integrated in government or in a different system, but that is the end. Now, if we want to understand the phases or the cycle of a project, it's like a life cycle of an individual from birth to the day the person dies. It's the same process that you follow. The only difference is we have used technical issues here and we've connected it to the external environment, but you must understand the project life cycle if you want to manage any project. Now, coming to manage projects. When I refer to projects, you will understand that I speak a lot about donor-related projects, but you can have a project in whatever area of your particular interest. There are for-profit projects or funding that people apply for, and then there is for non-profit as well, and we will talk about that tomorrow. In other words, there are funds for NGOs or NGO projects. There are funds for companies or company projects as well. And we will talk about that tomorrow, but I'm just trying to shape mindset here as we are going. I've put it in a different format for you as well, so that you can have a better picture. Every project has an initiating phase with its processes, as a planning phase with its processes, there's an execution phase, it has a monitoring phase, and then there is closure. Like I said earlier, in my experience, one of the reasons why projects fail is because we have put monitoring towards the end. You cannot start monitoring funds. If I give you funds, you can't start monitoring that fund and in the fourth phase of the project. You cannot start monitoring execution in the fourth phase of a project. So one of the paradigm shifts we want to have in modern day projects, we need to have our monitoring and evaluation plan up and running by the time from the initiation process. The second thing is, when we talk of closure, you need to have an exit strategy. Exit strategy is not at the end of a project. An exit strategy should be thought through in the beginning. When you are doing your strategic planning for your project, you already have your exit strategy. And these are some of the nuggets I'm sharing with you that will make you successful when you are talking to whatever form of donor, whether it is locally or nationally or internationally. These are some of the nuggets that you need to run with if you want to have successful execution, successful funding, successful support, or even stakeholder collaboration. We need to bring it home to individuals. And why I'm mentioning this is monitoring and exit strategies are issues that have been shared with us, and it has been embedded in our mindsets, and it has been done in the way it's been done. That is why you find we had last week the scenario of we vote, and at the end of the day we discover, but this and that happened, we've overlooked it. But when we have our exit strategies in place, you can plan accordingly. When you have your monitoring and evaluation strategies in place, you can plan accordingly. So this is still the project management, the process, and the process are also part of the cycles. Like I said, it's embedded in the cycles. So I want us to quickly talk about each of the processes so that we can have the foundation for the rest of the program. Before that, I would just like to talk about key responsibilities of project managers, because many times we misunderstand. You talk to people, they send you a call for proposals, or a call goes out, people submit, but they don't understand roles. And I've also encountered in many times in interviews, people apply for project managers, HIV project manager, because they have an idea of what HIV is all about, what COVID-19 is all about, but they do not understand the responsibilities of the manager. Now, the first thing is the manager must build a plan. Project managers are in charge of plotting out the most realistic course for the project. The plan must include the scope of the project, the timeline, and the budget. And this can also include identifying the right tools for the job. In other words, the right techniques, the right measures, whatever needs to be used for the job. And then the project manager is responsible for assembling the team, coming up with a team. Now, in most cases where there's no project in place and we apply, or where there's no staff in place and we apply, the donors want you to employ a finance manager for the project, a monitoring and evaluation manager for a project. And in most cases, it's a few people that are there, but once you have a well laid out plan, you'll be able to see who are your teams. And then identifying the proper team is critical to the basics of project management, a proper team. Every project team will vary depending on the scope, the initiative, and the functions needed to complete the project. I've worked on international projects where we were a team of 3 people, but I've also worked finding specialists and subject matter experts for each of the necessary tasks is ideal, but it is not always that you can find the specialist. So it's important that project managers understand how to use wisdom in assembling their teams. Another responsibility is assigning tasks, that is delegation. The project managers must provide their team with clear definition of specific tasks and timelines for every part of the project. Although each team member will be responsible for their own assignments, many tasks will require collaboration from both internal and external team members. And leading the team, that's also part of the project manager's responsibility. Now that the team has been assembled and their tasks have been assigned, the project managers must keep the machine well-oiled. We call it well-oiled. In other words, he must lead the team. And that is where your leadership skills come in. Covering the project management basics and beyond. This will include checking in on individuals for status updates, identifying clearing roadblocks, negotiating disagreements, keeping team morale high, and providing training and mentoring. This is one of the most daunting tasks in the project execution. Now, it's also important for us to understand that when we delegate, we need to understand what we are delegating. Just a tip for all of you, what we do in organizations nowadays is we assign a project to an individual that's already working within the organization when we are planning to promote that individual. Now, if you are not aware of the way people are getting promoted and only think that there will be an announcement and an advertisement, you might not be alert. Some managers will just throw work at you and you will feel, no, I'm not a doormat, but they are just testing your strength to work under pressure or to take up more responsibility. And many times they delegate it to you. So what we are saying is take on every task with absolute excellence. You don't know what you are prepared for. Then another key responsibility is budget management. Oh, and I can't overemphasize this. Most projects will require some expenses, a lot of expenses, which means understanding how to put together a project budget and managing costs is critical for success. So this will involve comparing real life expenditures to estimates and adjusting the project plan if necessary. Remember, we spoke earlier about cost of projects. And the world of finance or the financial side of a project is one of the most crucial ones if we look at economies. And managing timelines, as with a budget, project managers are tasked to keep everything on schedule. So the team is meeting the projected deadlines for completion. This will require setting realistic deadlines through the life cycle of the project, communicating consistently with their teams for status updates and maintaining a detailed schedule. One advice I want to give you is if your project manager is having too many meetings with you as a team and you don't like it, just remember either you are not feeding the project manager with the right information during meeting times, or you are not updating the project manager enough, or the project manager could be losing track or be distracted. So in my setting, what we used to do is we used to do stand-up meetings every Monday morning. Stand-up meeting means we all get together on a Monday morning and give a quick update on what is happening this week, who needs whose support, who's working where, what kind of funds need to be released. Even though everything is planned, we just reminding each other funds needs to be released. This meeting is there, this is what is happening. We're having this media online program so that everyone can know where to throw in their support. And then also engaging stakeholders is one of the key responsibilities of any project manager. Stakeholders play a large role in your project. Now we're talking internal and external stakeholders. We're talking stakeholders within the organization, but also our collaborators, influential people who are affected by the project. An essential part of project management basics. Project managers need to maintain a good relationship and an open line of communication with stakeholders who can not only help clear roadblocks or bottlenecks and empower your team, but also create unnecessary bottlenecks and derail a project if they become unhappy with the direction. So you must keep your stakeholders happy. You must keep them engaged. You must keep them on track with the necessary information that they need to know in order for them to give their support to a project. And then the project manager is responsible for project handover. So because when you have delivered everything, all your deliverables are met and so on, doesn't mean a project manager's job is over. Project manager must now deliver the project to the team who will be managing or maintaining and operating it moving forward. At this point, the project manager will no longer be the go-to person and will be assigned a new project maybe, or sometimes in our case, what we do, if it's United Nations projects that come to an end, what is the handover process? We start working on our communication strategy. What is in the strategy? Number two is, what does the budget say for this handover phase? Because the budget speaks to that phase as well. And then we go to all our stakeholders, key stakeholders, and have individual meetings with them, but then we also have exit strategy meetings with them. When it comes to government, we identify a focal point and government absorb the project into the government system, and we hand over whatever there is, whether it's buildings or vehicles or whatever is needed to hand over to them. So that is a process, and that is the role of the project manager. The project manager needs to document the process. Documentation is so important. Many of the court cases and the fraud cases and the corruption cases you see, it's because of a lack of proper record keeping. In the record keeping, we say everything not recorded is everything not done. So documentation of lessons learned, documentation of success stories, documentations of best practices, documentations of findings and everything. So that is important for the continuous existence of whatever has been implemented in a community or in a setting. And this will help others to avoid making the same mistakes or taking the advantages and the shortcuts that have been discovered in the process. So the project manager's role is very, very, very crucial. Now, when we initiate the project, that is the first phase of the project life cycle. And it's essential that we understand what is involved in this. Every cycle is a phase, and a phase is a process. So you initiate a project by defining its purpose. Everyone must be clear, what is this project all about? Because you cannot take on a job or a position if you don't know what you are doing. The good news to a project manager is they never execute a project alone. That is why we say delegate. They are also in a position where they themselves can assemble their team. The team can be consisting of individuals that are employed, volunteers, and also external stakeholders. What we advise is, when you have stakeholders, whether it's government or whatever, always have your committees in place so that they can also help to execute some of the functions of the project. Now, in the initiation phase, A project is initiated by defining scope, purpose, justification. And remember, when you write your proposal, these are also things we look at justification and the solution to be implemented. You also need to recruit suitably skilled project team. Now remember, sometimes you need people for a beginning phase. There are certain big projects that, or huge projects that they employ people in the initial phase for 6 months and then they are out. So that is temporary. It could be a consulting, it could be a volunteer or paid volunteer. We nowadays have that term, paid volunteers. The initiation phase involves the following 6 steps. And that is the project management cycle. Project initiation. First of all, you have to develop your case, and then you establish the terms of reference. You set up project office, or you can just set up your space, your workspace, and then you undertake a feasibility study, and then you appoint a team, and then you perform a phase review. Now remember, we are only talking about the initiation phase here, a phase review before you move on. Now, not every project needs a feasibility study. Like I said earlier, when it comes to the cycle, it is unique to a project. In some of our projects, for example, we do family strengthening programs. And in these family strengthening programs, you empower families, but you have to identify these families when you empower them. Now, in our projects, family strengthening program was part of a portfolio program. And out of that family strengthening program, we now had to come up with projects. And when we start with these projects, we do feasibility studies. Those feasibility studies help us to identify in which areas are the vulnerable families. And then we can now implement the family strengthening program after identifying them through structures and so on, having the feasibility study results. So not for everyone. In other projects, feasibility study can come in the middle. Others, you first need to do a feasibility study before you can do the project. So it's all project specific, but these are some of the elements that are in the initiation stage. Then also in your initiation stage, you can also look at your project goals. You define your goals, and then it may include any of the following: a feasibility study, like I said, may create a project charter. Project charter is a process on its own with different elements within. Remember, I said process is embedded into the cycle. And then identify key stakeholders and select project management tools. Now, huge projects like government projects or international donors that decide we are funding you for a 5-year project. With them, normally, there's a requirement for a project charter, because a project charter has its own processes. It has its own planning. It also involves strategic planning within the charter in itself. It has its own project staff, and it has a separate fund. What am I saying? In an initiation phase, depending on your project, you can have a different fund and a very separate budget that will then help you to only execute this phase. In huge projects, initiation phase can be as long as 6 months to 1 year, but it can also be 3 years. If it's huge projects like a mining, construction projects, they will hear phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. They are practically speaking about the phases within the cycle. So we need to understand that. And then the planning phase. The planning phase is so critical to create a project roadmap. The entire team should be able to follow that. Now, the uniqueness of planning is even in the initiation phase, you need to plan how you are going to do or initiate your project, but it's a phase on its own. And like I said, the focus should be, if you want to be successful, 90 to 95% planning with 5% excellent execution. So this is where all the details and the goals are outlined in order to meet the requirements laid out by the organization or by your project itself. So you create a project plan. You develop a resource plan, define goals and performance measures, communicate the roles and responsibilities. You build out workflows and you anticipate the risks and create contingency plans. Now, if you look at these, each component is a plan on its own. Secondly, you conduct workshops, you work with people, you have either your stakeholders or your teams already. And in most cases, when you have a smaller project, I believe all great things start small anyway. You have a smaller team, and with this team, you can do all this. And the planning, for me, the planning phase of the project is the most tedious. Secondly, it requires most of the work. And if you have a lot of think tanks on your project, if you have people that think strategically, people that can analyze very well, you utilize them in your planning phase, because this is the phase, you know, the plan is the thought put into action, or the execution of the thought in itself. And the plan is the most crucial part of your project. So never do it alone. What you can do is, you are the one who gets the vision. If you are the visionary of the project, you will do your scribbling and your everything. But when you have written the vision, like the Bible says, write the vision, put it on clay, so that everyone who reads it can run with it. And that is what you actually do. If that is done very well, the initiation phase, then your planning phase will be you will enjoy the planning phase. If you are passionate about planning, then you will enjoy the planning phase. If your vision is written out very well, if you've got the right team. One thing I want to advise everyone, if it's your personal project that you are working on, you must know who your people are that you have in your planning phase. Not everyone that is with you is for you. So when it comes to the planning phase, you need to have the right people around you, so that people don't run with your concepts and mess up with your project before you can start executing it. And during your planning phase, you are able to identify the personalities and the strengths. You must do a SWOT analysis. SWOT analysis, an analysis of your strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats of the particular project that you are implementing. What we also do in larger projects is what we call a PESTLE analysis. A PESTLE analysis look at the political situation, the economic situation, the social situation, everything involved there, everything. And then we combine it and see within the document, what does the plan speak to, or how does the plan speak to the future of the project, and also what we want to achieve. So your planning phase is so crucial. Now, the second part of your planning phase is a preparation for your stakeholder engagement. Your stakeholder could be us, that are working with you if we are part of your team, and also your external stakeholders. But you must be absolutely prepared before you go and present the plan. If it is a business proposal that you are doing, or a business project, your preparation for this phase is very important. You establish your goals and your deliverables before you even go for the stakeholder engagement meeting. Identify your team members and assign tasks. Now, the assignment of tasks for this particular phase is not the same as the assignment of tasks in the initial phase and in your planning phase. Here you assign when you are going to present your case. How are you going to advocate? Who says what? When do we speak? Who leads the conversation? Who leads negotiation? Who leads explanations? Who leads clarifications? All those assignments are done. Develop a draft project plan. You developed your draft. I believe it's done in the planning phase, and now you are looking at what you are taking along when you are doing your presentation. Define which metrics will be used to measure the project success. Identify and prepare potential roadblocks, and then establish logistics and schedules for team communication. Choose your preferred project management methodology. Why I'm saying preferred is your specific project will determine your methodology. Ensure your team has access and knowledge of the relevant tools. Whatever tools you apply, whatever techniques you apply, your team, your core team that you are working with in this phase need to have access. In other words, they have the knowledge, they have the understanding, but they also know where to get or from whom to get the information. Then now you schedule your meeting, you set the agenda, you prepare your slides, and then after that phase is done, project is signed off, it has been approved, it has been endorsed, you now come to execution. And we assume that at your execution phase, you already have your funding, budgets have been approved, and you are now executing your project. Now, remember, we said execution is simply the art of getting things done. Deliverables are built to make sure the project is meeting requirements. This is where most of the time the money and the people are pulled into the project. Now, in most cases, in the execution phase, it's got its own budget, of course, but you can pull in more staff. You will see where you need volunteers. You will see where you need consultants. And as previously mentioned, a kickoff meeting is held. Okay, we've done our kickoff meeting, and the official start of the execution phase, the agenda might look like this: your introductions, your project background, your scope, your plan, because you've done your planning, you've done your background, you've done your feasibility studies, the roles, who is who in the project, the communication, the tools, and then also the next steps. And then you open the floor for questions and answers, and your delegated team is there to talk, or maybe even one person. What we normally do is we identify an individual. Does not necessarily have to be the project manager, but there are certain things that the project manager is accountable for, like introductions and, you know, talking about the vision under which the project is functioning and so on. But you have your spokesperson, you have your communications person, you have everyone in place, and you decide when they respond. And in most cases, when you introduce this project, it could be a launch, it could be a press conference, there could be media involved, or it could be a smaller group where you decide, let us start here first, and after a period of time of execution, then we launch, because at a launch, it is very good to show forth what you have done thus far. It's very important to be able to show something at a launch. And then the controlling and monitoring phase. This phase happens in tandem with the execution phase. In other words, it happens, I can see you can't do the one without the other. As the project moves forward, the project manager must make sure that all moving parts are seamlessly headed in the right direction. Now, this is also one of the assignments. As a project manager, you keep your eyes on the ground. You do not micromanage, but you keep your eyes on the ground. You make sure that all parts are moving. Everyone is aware of what they're supposed to do. They have understanding of what they're supposed to do, and they're executing. If adjustments to the project plan need to be made due to unforeseen circumstances, like COVID-19, or change in direction, they may happen in this phase, the controlling and monitoring phase. At the end of this phase, all the agreed project deliverables should be completed and accepted by the customer or the beneficiaries. And then during this phase also, what could happen is management of resources, execution of every process of management, monitoring of project performance, risk management, status meetings and reports, update project schedules, and modification of project plans if need be. Now, many times things happen. Maybe there's no COVID-19 or no disasters, no, but things happen within. Somebody resigns, somebody dies, you know, things happen. And there need to be modification of project plans, or there's a turnover, change over in the organization. So you should always be prepared to modify your project plans. Sometimes there are just delays within a project. Now remember, the donors want the reports on a regular basis. They want to monitor budgets. They want to see your burn rates. And that is why you always need to be able to modify. We sometimes call it catch-up plans. Catch-up plans, you need to see if there's a backlog, how are we going to catch up with our targets? We need to understand how our target population, are we meeting, are we making programs? Are we meeting our targets? Very important, because this is where the donors' eyes are on. They receive the monitoring reports. They receive the controlling, the financial controls, and all those things. They receive all those reports and they ask you questions. One of the challenges that I encounter with many of the international donors is you can give them a regular report, and after 3 months, they're asking for the same report. And after 6 months, they're asking a question within the same report as if we have never reported to them. So those are some of the frustrations that you will encounter. It's their way of monitoring. They've got very many different levels of monitoring. It happens in government as well. It happens in many other projects as well. Now for the project closure phase. The closure phase, remember, it's a phase. It's a critical step in the project management life cycle. It signals the official end of the project and provides a period of reflection, of wrap up and organization of materials. Now, what we normally do is, this is where your exit strategy comes into play. Now, remember, your exit strategy was developed in the beginning, and within that exit strategy, you have your Gantt chart, or you have your project plan, your timelines, where you say from this phase onwards, we start working on execution, on an exit strategy. Now, remember, a tip for this day and age, funding and projects where the donors can really support you. If you come up with sustainability strategies, you must have your plan be a step ahead of a donor. Now, project closure does not mean people always lose jobs or all activities stop. It could be the end of a 3-year funding cycle, a 2-year funding cycle, a 5-year funding cycle. They close the cycle and they decide to either start again immediately after, or maybe sometimes after 6 months, sometimes after a year. And you have to have your strategy in place. So here you can still do your workshops, your strategic planning. And what we normally do is we do a 6 months build up to the end of the project closure. That involves a communication strategy, an advocacy strategy. We do press conferences, we do impact studies, we do best practice studies. You know, we get consultants in, we see what we have done. It's not just, it is closing, we are wrapping up, we are writing reports. No, it's way beyond that. We talk to our stakeholders on the ground. We talk to our beneficiaries as well and see, are there any other project or are there any other activities they can continue on their own? Because remember, you must empower your beneficiaries throughout the project. And what we also do is we look at sustainability strategies. You must, as an African, you must always think how we can help ourselves at the end of this project. That is why I believe in an exit strategy that starts in the beginning of the project. If it's food and nutrition, can we at this stage already have our own gardening projects? Do we have individuals that are able to produce local produce of the same project that is feeding our people? Do we have our own vaccine laboratories at the end of such a project that we have started up on our own, and maybe we generated funds locally, you know, all these kind of things. And that is why a project manager should be someone who can think strategically and creatively, and should be very, very much innovative, because at this stage, the innovation kicks in. And you should be able to know what you're working with donors. You bring out the good you've learned from them that you can adopt for the way forward, or for a new phase or a new project. Because remember, we said time bound, and we said what you are delivering and what you're ending with, it ends there. Take inventory of all deliverables. tie up any loose ends, hand the project off to the client or the team that will be managing the project on a day-to-day. This is in the case of when a project is absorbed into the government or handed over to a community structure, you hand it over. Perform a post-mortem to discuss and document any learnings from the project. And that is where lessons learned comes in. There could be best practices, but there can also be emerging good practices as well. And then also your final reports. Make sure your reports are detailed and clear. Very important, when you get to the end of the project, always make sure that in your final phase, your burn rates are good. We want good burn rates. Burn rates means how you have spent the money that the donor gave you. Now, many times it's a continuation of project, but they will tell you we are ending end of May and the next phase will start at the end of June. But at the end of May, how does donors work? You send back all the money you have in your coffers of the first phase. Now, if you were given 7 million to execute and you are only sending back 3 million because work wasn't carried out, there were so many delays, there were no catch-up plans, you are telling me as the donor that you are only capacitated enough to use 3 million. A donor won't tell you keep the 4 million and continue. They take all the monies back, they evaluate the process, and then they send you back what you are requesting in your new phase. Now, if you request 10,000 because you're now looking at a bigger project or an expansion, they will not give you that 10,000 because you could not finish the 10 million, because you could not finish 7 million. And that is how donors are working. That is how they evaluate us. So tie up all the loose and perform post-mortem to discuss what went well, what were your challenges, and so on. And then in your closure, also you organize all your project documents in a centralized location. Donors can come back to you 6 months or a year after the project has closed and they want answers. Communicate the success of the project to stakeholders and executives. Have great reports. Have authentic reports and have evidence-based reports. And celebrate the project completion and acknowledge the team members. So there's quite a number of things you do towards the end, the run-up of the project. You need to plan for contingency as well. Now, why am I saying that is people will start panicking and they will start resigning from the project, and that can impact the success of your project if your mindset is that of someone who feels that there's still 3 months left, there's still 4 months left. So that is not how we reason. But it's important for us to have a very, very clear closure plan. So for tonight, I'm going to end there with my discussion so that we can break and gain some energy for tomorrow's session, because it will be a deep session on monitoring and evaluation and project proposal, resource mobilization, and donor relations. We are going deep, and then we're going to look at how we can get funds as well. So thank you everyone for listening. I'm ending here. Are there any questions or comments? Comments are welcome. Inputs are welcome. Is there anybody who works on a project who can identify or share with us something? All right, while I'm waiting, there's a question. There are questions here. Okay, let's see, what were the first? I stopped hearing for a while now. Hello. 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 Are we connected?